hold hands and close your eyes. It's midnight, and you're listening to the Ghost Story Guys. Welcome to the Ghost Story Guys. I'm Brennan Storr.
I'm Paul Bestall.
And this is a show where we talk about spooks, specters, and all the other things watching us from the shadows beyond the campfire. Some conversations only make sense after the sun has set, and this is most definitely one. Thanks for tuning in. This is episode number 187. And we're coming to you from that tiny mountain cabin you dream about, but can never quite reach. Now, my good friend Paul Crash Bestall, how are you doing?
I'm all right, thanks.
You punished the earth yet again with your mighty skull?
Well, as with anything, I tend, if I bleed, other people tend to panic. I didn't think it was that big of an issue, but, just hurt a bit.
And to be clear, Paul fell down on a skating rink, bust his head open, bleeding everywhere, terrifying passers-by, and he responded to me by saying, well, it started to clot by the time I left the rink, so it's not really a big deal.
Yeah, well, I could tell, because when I took my hand away, there was like big lumps on it, and I said, look, it's fine, it's clotting. Clearly, these people have not seen a lot of blood.
I'd like to say that's probably not a rare experience, not seeing a lot of blood. I myself have not seen a lot of blood in my life. And I've seen people actually die, but I've never seen that much blood. So, no, you created some core memories for those folks that day.
I'm glad to do my bit, It's a bit of a strange week, because that's how the week started. And then obviously I had a first. I was doing an interview yesterday evening with a lovely lady up in Scotland, and she had to apologise before we started because her neighbours were fornicating loudly. And you could hear them. Like,
And you can hear them on the recording.
Not on the recording, but on our little chat beforehand.
Amazing. Mysteries and Monsters After Dark. Mysteries and the Trouser Monsters.
So yeah, it's been a week of intriguing experiences so far, and it's only Thursday.
Man, my week has been nowhere near as interesting. In fact, my week, I think the most interesting thing about my week was that I missed something, and I had some childhood fears confirmed, and I will explain. I'm in Victoria now. I'm hanging out with Nick, and I flew out Monday morning at 6 a.m. So that means getting to the airport by 4, which means getting up around 3 a.m., which means going to bed, pretending like I can go to bed around 7. I, of course, did not get to sleep until around 11, so consequently, Monday was hell. But I tried, blocked out the light, climbed into bed, and on the one night I go to bed early, a flaming freight train passed through downtown London, Ontario, where I was living. I guess a car full of railway ties caught fire and did about $35,000 worth of damage to this train, and it was just rolling through the city, going from west to east, and it took, about close to 30 firefighters to put this damn thing out. So it was just this massive conflagration rolling across the bridge through the town, and I missed the whole goddamn thing because I had to go to bed early. I'm never going to sleep again. All right, so on this episode, we have a really special episode. It's the first of a two-parter. We have this epic email from a new listener, Meghan. And we are going to be sharing her story across the next 2 episodes. And we're doing that because it was roughly the length of about 2.5 Ghost Story Guys scripts, this message, even after editing. And there is some really, really interesting stuff in there. Meghan has had a very haunted life, and I'm really, really excited to share it with everyone. And before we get there, I wanted to share something that a friend sent me. My friend lives here on Vancouver Island, and this is what he sent. He said, long story short, me and my dad went for a hike on Lasqueti Island, which sounds to me like Rocky Balboa is trying to say spaghetti, but that's neither here nor there. There's a bunch of long-gone logging camp spots in this specific area. They used to throw all their garbage into the creek or on the side of the hill, so there's some neat stuff if you keep your eyes open. Super old glassware, things like this. I found this creepy old doll head and brought it back to my dad's property, facing out towards a driveway. About 6 months passed, and I went back up, and my dad randomly said, hey, do you know where the doll head is? We need to bring it back where we found it. And he goes on to say that a bunch of weird stuff has been happening, like multiple occasions of him losing something that was in plain sight, cleaning the cabin, looking everywhere, and then coming back and finding it standing straight up in the middle of the floor, or at eye level on the deck railing right outside the door. He's felt like he's been watched, that he saw what he called a predator-looking shimmering thing sitting in a tree above him in broad daylight. And when my friend sent this, he also referred to that as Glimmerman, and I know that that is something that has come up on Where Does the Road Go? Strange Familiars. So it's, and also I think referenced in Missing 411 The Hunters as well. My friend goes on to say, the kicker of the last bit was that literally that morning before I went up island, I woke up and was getting ready to leave. My girlfriend left the bedroom and went to the washroom. When she came into the kitchen, I heard her talking to me. But I was still in bed. Then she stopped and came back into the bedroom on the verge of tears and said, I swore you were in the kitchen. I saw something the same size as you passing the hallway as I came out of the bathroom and followed you in there, but you were in bed and the kitchen was empty. So, moral of the story, don't take shit you find in the woods.
Yes, that is a vital lesson. Careful what you pick up.
All right, so before we can tell Meghan's story, and before Paul gets shot with a crossbow, we got to get to this because you just never know with the life of Paul Bestel when these things can happen.
When it is Sheffield.
Exactly. So before any of that happens, we got to thank our patrons.
This one's for the patrons.
Patrons, we could not do what we do without you. So thank you, thank you, thank you. This show exists because of our patrons. For real, guys. Every single person who downloads the Ghost Story Guys, you help make us who we are, but patrons are the ones who truly allow the show to continue. You pay our bills, and those bills are many and varied. Most of it's just gauze for Paul.
Painkillers.
And painkillers. So we want to give you an extra special thank you. And of course, we'd like to thank all our patrons and Apple Podcast subscribers, but right now, we'd like to thank our latest. They are
Lynn Breitbart,
MFA 88,
Megan Rocket,
Beckler,
Mabel.
Again, thank you so much from the bottom of our terrible hearts. We deeply appreciate your support. And if you'd like to join the team, head to patreon.com/ghoststoryguys. That's patreon.com/ghoststoryguys. Or sign up to Ghost Story Guys Premium via Apple Podcasts, and you will get access to all kinds of cool stuff. But the most important thing, you can get an ad-free feed. And who doesn't want that? Ads suck. Listen to the end of the show, we'll tell you about everything else. But for now, for that ad-free feed, head to patreon.com/ghoststoryguys or sign up to Ghost Story Guys Premium via Apple Podcasts. Also, if you do sign up to Apple Podcasts, make sure to forward your confirmation to us at ghoststoryguys@gmail.com, and we will make sure to thank you here in this section because we value your contributions just as much. All right, one last thing before we start with the stories, or story, I guess, in this episode. Shout out to our composer, Rainy Days for Ghosts. Rainy Days for Ghosts is a project of film journalist and musician Harper Smith. You can find more of Harper's work at rainydaysforghosts.bandcamp.com or by searching for Rainy Days for Ghosts on music streaming platforms everywhere. All right, we're going to take a quick break and be right back with the story. All right, so as we mentioned on this episode, we are sharing one single lengthy listener story, and you will hear me and Paul comment from time to time. We're not going to wait till the end, because if we did, there is a very good chance we would have forgotten by the end what it was we had planned to say. So, this story is from Meghan, and it begins. Looking back now, all of the homes that I grew up in were haunted. From an early age, I've always seen ghosts. It's always been second nature, a thing that just is. In recent years, after I moved to New York City, my abilities shifted and grew into sensing energies, or perhaps sensing impressions left on a place or an object. It took practice, but now it's just an extension of common sense to me. I can tell if something has energy hanging onto it. My sister dubs it spooky vibe checks. In summary, I steer clear of antique shops and pre-owned items. More on that later, as I have questions and theories about how and why that extra sense came to be. For now, I would like to tell you my ghost stories. And before anyone gets their hopes up, that is in the second half of the story, which you will hear on episode 188. And in fact, Paul, remind me before the end of this episode to tell you about my used furniture experience that is a recent thing that has happened.
Okay. Was it haunted?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, I shall.
Good times in Bren's room. The only good times currently happening in Bren's room in Ontario. Except for that time I brought some donuts into my bedroom. That was probably the most excitement that's happened in there since I've moved in. But anyways, back to Meghan's story. I've seen ghosts everywhere. In my homes, in my schools, my grandparents' houses, restaurants, bathrooms, you name it. My mother grew up with stories about spirits and ghosts, and she's always been comfortable with the subject. Coupled with being raised Catholic and always believing in an afterlife, the topic of ghosts did not scare me much as a child. It had a normalcy attached to it. All the same, I knew I had to be careful who I regaled my ghostly tales to. My dad was a staunch skeptic at the time when most of the occurrences happened, which made little sense to me knowing as he, too, was raised Catholic. Whenever my mom, sister, and I watched our favorite Friday night shows Ghost Adventures and Ghost Whisperer, he would do his best to debunk it or scoff at the scripted shows about a woman who saw and helped ghosts cross over. At that point, you're just being a jerk, man. Just watch the fucking show. It's like when Nick sometimes will be watching shows and she'll say, because she was a CSI, she'll say, well, that's not how it's done. Like, yeah, no, but if they do it the proper way, it's going to take 6 times as long and there's no plot. You can't survive being shot like that. No, you can't. But if we want to see John Wick just laying dead on the ground for the remaining 90 minutes of the film, I think we have to play with believability a little bit.
It's the magic of cinema.
That's it. Meghan says, I didn't say anything to my dad about this for 13 years because I knew he wouldn't believe me. But that's not true anymore. Not after living in the home that housed my formidable years. Our first townhouse in Woodbridge, Virginia. It was also the most haunted house I ever lived in. Since there are other tenants living there now, I have changed the address out of respect for their privacy. 1926 Crossbow Court was nothing out of the ordinary. The last townhouse on the row, white with black shutters, hidden away in one of the many cul-de-sacs that make up the neighborhood. Surrounded by barren woods filled with nothing more than sticks and trees cracked in half at the trunk, my childhood home was just like the rest in almost all ways. Almost. This was our first house. Every other home that I grew up in was an apartment, so being 8 years old and finally getting to run around the living room and fly up and down the staircase was like middle school nirvana. My sister, whom I've always called and will always call Sissy, was 12 when we moved in. She was at that age where she wasn't a kid anymore, but not fully a teenager either. It turned out there was a lot that she hadn't told anyone about her own out-of-the-ordinary encounters. She was terrified by her experiences and had learned how to block out her gifts and tuck them away where she wouldn't use them anymore. I understand, and even while I write this, I sit here and wonder, why didn't I do the same? Moving day was fun. I helped my dad carry the parts of my IKEA loft bed up the stairs and to the first bedroom on the right. I got the smaller room since I was a younger sibling. It didn't make me angry. I understood that my almost teenager older sister deserved the bigger room. She had more stuff going on and things to move in her room, like a desk and chair and a bookcase. Me, on the other hand, after I helped put together my bed and set up my Barbie castle and American Girl dolls, I was done moving in. Setting everything up took a few weeks. The house was clean, with sunlight pooling in the large, white-rimmed windows in the living room. All was well, everything in its place, because everything had a place. The only part of the home that never seemed to have settled in the structure was the basement. As an adult, I now question, why is it always the basement? In every haunted house, the penultimate paranormal fight sequence between good and evil always takes place in the basement. Or the big boogie monster will reside in the deepest and darkest place in said basement. Whatever the case, the basement is an important part in ghost stories. This one is no different. Our basement was half finished. The left side of the basement that we used for family movie nights had a fireplace and long white-rimmed sliding glass windows. We put a navy blue couch with a sectional in front of the television with a halogen lamp next to the TV to keep the light inside. My mother put curtains over the sliding glass windows that looked out into the dark forest. To this day, she has a cover over every window, citing that someone can always see inside. Little did we know it wasn't anything or anyone outside that we needed to worry about. The other half, the right side of the basement, was starkly different to the half we hung out in. The right half, the unfinished half, seemed like it was always cold and dark. No matter what time of the day or night, no matter the weather, the darkness was always there. The open rafters overlooked our laundry room and its cement floor. My father put his grand honey-colored gateway computer hutch in this half, and it sat adjacent to the laundry room. On the right side of the hutch was a storage room of some sort. When we moved in, we learned that this storage room was supposed to be another bathroom, but the developers never finished it. That was it. No explanation why the right side of the basement was left uncarpeted with the ceiling exposing the wooden beams that supported the upper floor, or why the would-be bathroom was left with a drain in the floor and an exposed light bulb that worked only half the time and had to be turned on with a string hanging from the ceiling. I suppose my parents were just happy to be able to finally afford a house, and we used it as a storage room for our holiday decorations and things we weren't sure where to put just yet. But that room was mysterious to me because of its unfinished nature. It was the room that was unsure of what it was supposed to be, what it was supposed to function as, inside the cold and dark right side of the basement. I knew I would be back to explore it. And I gotta say, Paul, that was the same in my old apartment. We had this room that just didn't really seem to know what it wanted to be. It kind of had a bunch of different uses. It was just like a junk room. And that was always, I think, probably the most active room in my apartment. I think kind of that was the locus of everything. That's where it came from. And it was the same, like, again, had this nebulous purpose. It was only the place people ever passed out after parties. That was the only constant.
Yeah, sometimes you can buy a property or go somewhere or rent somewhere, and occasionally there'll just be a really random room for no reason. I remember a friend rented a house and he'd got like an attic room, but off this attic staircase was another like mini staircase, which you essentially had to crawl in to get into this like tiny bedroom. It was a room for fairies or something. It was and they'd taken the time to carpet it. But it was tiny. It wasn't even. It was just like a room, just randomly stuck to the side of the house, halfway up it.
So, and this is different from the one you found.
Oh yes.
I feel like, when I was talking to Soraya yesterday, I mentioned that I've known what I'm told is an unusual number of people who've gone missing, and he said, "Well, I think anything above 0 would be unusual. Anything above 1, you're pushing it."
Yeah.
And I feel like this is how I feel about you finding tiny little fairy rooms tucked away in houses. You find one, all right, that's weird. That's a story you tell for the rest of your life. You find 2, okay, no, this is on you now.
Yeah, I mean, we owned one, so we never understood why there was a door halfway up a wall.
Something nefarious, I have no doubt.
Well, yeah, because that was the haunted toilet. That door was in the haunted toilet.
Right, that's it. Yes, I remember now.
So maybe whatever lived in that room was the one that came downstairs to flush it.
At least it's conscientious. I've lived with roommates who don't have the good sense to flush.
Yes, good manners.
Oh, and I was going to tell you about my haunted furniture thing before we go on to the next part of Meghan's story. So when I moved into my place in London, obviously I came from Victoria with just a suitcase, right? I flew out. So I didn't have any furniture. So I've just kind of been piecing it together as I go. And also because I don't plan on being in London forever, I don't want to invest in expensive, well, one, I'm a poor-ass podcaster, so I can't afford expensive furniture. But 2, even if I could, doesn't make sense because I'm not going to be there for forever. So I just kind of got a bunch of temporary furniture. And I needed a dresser and a bedside table. I found a great deal from a guy on Facebook Marketplace who I think refurbishes stuff refurbishes is probably a very generous way of putting it. I think he put some vaguely matching paint on things and then sells them for probably about 3 times what he paid.
Upcycle.
Yeah, exactly. Upcycled. And so he, and he delivered. So I got a dresser and I got a bedside table. Didn't think much of it. But as I mentioned to you on a recent show, been feeling like I've been being watched in the bedroom. Again, I know how it sounds, but let's just move past it.
Put the donuts back in the box.
You can't make me. I'm playing ring toss over here.
God. It's going to be a long game with a target that small.
But yeah, so I had this feeling like there was someone watching from the one side of the bedroom opposite the window, so where the closet is. Wasn't all the time, but there was some nights it was more strong than others. And usually I fall asleep on the couch for the first couple hours, then transition to the bedroom around 2 or 3 in the morning. And as I've said before, I work at this co-working space now in St. Thomas, where that's where I'll go and do writing and editing just so I'm out of the house. And one day while I was headed down there, I thought, I wonder if they've got like a shop where I can buy sage. So I found this place called Purely Wicked. And so I went in there, I bought a candle, I bought some sage. And when I got home that night, I saged my bedroom. Actually, I saged the whole apartment. But what I found interesting is the places that were the hardest to move through with the bundle were not the closet like I expected, but it was parts of the dresser. When I was passing the smoldering sticks across the dresser, I found there were times I actually had to do it about 8 times before I could move my hand freely across it without feeling like I was encountering resistance. So it was almost like there was something attached to the dresser. So like I cleaned it up, did the whole apartment. Whatever was going on was clear for a few days. And then just, I want to say, a night or two before I came out to the West Coast, it started to happen again. But there seemed to be a tie with, and I'm pretty sure I've mentioned this, there is sometimes a really funky smell in the back stairs.
Yes, you have.
Yeah. And what I've noticed is on nights where that is strong, the feeling of presence in the bedroom is equally strong. I don't know if it's the same thing or if it's just that there are nights where the place is more active generally, and so all its various bugaboos come out and start making themselves known. But I thought it was interesting that, there was definitely something with the furniture, but even after clearing that out, there's still something going on.
Yes, not like that video I saw earlier of somebody on TikTok who burnt sage outside their house and their mother-in-law couldn't enter.
I'm going to miss TikTok if they ever ban it.
Yes. As a kid, I loved to dig. Most times I wouldn't even know what I was digging for, but I would usually end up finding a toy that I thought was lost in the move, or maybe an old Christmas tablecloth speckled with debris that my mother would just tell me to throw out. But one day, as I fought my way through the clutter of bins and boxes and unwanted baubles, I found a door. At a glance, someone might think it was just a wooden wall to mark the dead end of the storage room. What drew me in, however, was the writing on it. I can't remember the number exactly, most likely 1926. But it was an address, Paradise Court. I gasped, thinking I'd solved an unknown mystery at this discovery. I ran upstairs to tell my mum, and she confirmed it was the old street name decades ago when the townhouse was built. Questions dizzied my adolescent mind as I strung together characters from a different era playing out like a daytime soap opera. When I returned, the panel with the address scribbled in black marker called to me. I wanted to open it to quench my curiosity, or perhaps even fan it on further, but my mother forbade it. Decades of dust could be in there, was her reasoning. I wonder now if she was afraid of what exactly made me want to open it. The possibility of what we could unearth. After that day, I never looked at it again. I don't remember the exact moment I knew our house was haunted, nor do I recall the first experience I had in my childhood home. The best I can do is to start at the beginning of my youngest memories there. Growing up, I hated the everyday motions of going to school, so it makes no sense that night before the first day of school every year I never slept. I was too excited. So there I was, laying in my loft bed and playing on my Game Boy Advance. A slow rumble started to sound outside. I shut my game, curious about the noise, when the rest of the August night was humid and quiet. That rumble grew louder and louder and louder, until a terrifying realization gripped me. The sound wasn't outside, but inside my room. The sound sounded like 1,000 horses beating the ground. It was deafening. I covered my ears and shut my eyes, hoping it would all go away soon. After about half a minute, it dissipated. I leaned over my loft bed and looked at my American Girl dolls. One doll, Felicity, owned horses, and I had her 2 plastic horses nestled under my loft bed where the dolls were perched. My first thought that the horses had come alive, and I shrunk back to the corner of my bed. But then my rational mind caught a hold of me, and eventually I convinced myself that it had to have been ghosts, as the area we lived in was very much a busy and bustling town, not a quiet and rural area where you can expect to hear horses. The next morning I told my mum what I'd heard. She nodded. Well, this is Civil War ground. A famous Manassas battle took place not 15 minutes from here. She acted like that explained it all, and in a weird way it did. I went to school hoping the horses would not be a regular occurrence, and I did not hear them again. I loved to play Barbies, and I'd set up my Barbie castle in the basement on the right side of it with the television and couch. One Saturday morning, I raced downstairs to play before everyone woke up for breakfast. I sat criss-crossed and played for maybe 10 minutes before I let myself notice the other half of the basement, and the eyes watching me. It was a heavy presence, and despite the early morning sunshine pouring in, that side of the basement was pitch black, I couldn't even see the outline of anything in that room. I knew something was there, watching me. The presence was so palpable, it felt as if another human being was in the room with me and supervising my playtime. I pretended to keep playing as I devised a plan to get the heck out of there. The staircase straddled both rooms perfectly, so it would be easy to run up the stairs without having any contact with the right side of the basement. Still, I was afraid of being caught by the darkness or chased up the steps. Within a few minutes, I gathered enough courage to enact my plan. I dropped my dolls suddenly and raced up the stairs and slammed the basement door behind me. I listened. For what, I wasn't sure, but the energy was light and peaceful now that I was upstairs. It was warm, clear, and safe. After that, I always went to the basement with another person, and it remained like that for the rest of my family. Whenever my mum did laundry, I would always go with her, but the times that I was in school and my mum was home alone, she would go to the basement to watch TV while she folded our clothes. She would place the folded laundry on the basement steps while she rotated other loads, and something always kicked her folded laundry back down the basement steps. This happened often, and I remember my mum telling me that she got so fed up with it one day she yelled, "This is my home and you need to stop kicking the laundry." I don't think it happened again after that. We still went downstairs together as much as we could. I suppose we always knew it was just safer.
One day I want to see a ghost story where the basement is haunted and they just fill the fucker in with concrete. That's what I want to see. Problem solved.
That's an interesting conundrum.
See, I could have been a great Ghostbuster. I don't need a proton pack, I just need a cement mixer and some bees.
If you fill the space, surely the essence will gravitate to the next available space, will it not?
He might, but he's not down in the spooky-ass basement anymore. Now he's in the sunlight. He's on my terms.
Yeah, but nobody's getting clean clothes anymore.
Overrated. T-shirts are cheap at Costco.
All right, capitalism, Colin.
I'm embarrassed to say I did that when I came out. I didn't pack any clothes. I just bought socks and shirts at Costco when I got here. I packed like trousers and underpants, but that was it. Everything else I'm just leaving here. I'm going to be a bi-coastal bitch. I'm going to have clothes in both places. Ludacris had hose in different area codes. I've got wardrobes in different area codes. All right, before the next segment, a quick ad break. If you're a patron or an Apple Podcast subscriber, you don't have to listen to any of this nonsense. All right, back to the story. I loved my loft bed. I felt too cool for school being up there and having a bird's eye view of my room. Under my bed, I had my American Girl dolls all set up in a semicircle with their beds and various accessories. That sounds like a ritual of some kind, Megan. I gotta be honest with you. We are summoning Brittany Murphy.
That's the kind of thing you would do with toys?
I feel like I should say no to this.
Well, I don't do it now, because obviously any toys I own are safely still packaged in their boxes.
Naturally.
But obviously when I was a younger person, I'd have my G.I. Joe figures or my Star Wars figures sat around, chilling, like that.
And I had my Ninja Turtles doing the same.
Yeah. It must be some kind of, I don't know, what is the connection? Why do children put their toys in semicircles like they're at book club?
I repeat, we are trying to summon the idols of days gone past.
I was trying to summon the Star Wars figures I didn't own yet.
There we go. I was trying to summon some Transformers toys. We can never afford those. I didn't watch the show. I just like the idea of trucks and cars and trains. Okay, this is explaining a few things about my neurochemistry. Let's move on.
Okay, good luck.
My posters consisted of artists like Shakira, the Pussycat Dolls, and the latest Disney heartthrob. I thought my room was perfect, everything where I wanted it. The night the shaking started was just like any other night. The cool wind blew softly outside in the unbothered dark. Oh, I like that sentence. Nicely done. I was peacefully dreaming when I awoke slowly to my metal bed frame shaking furiously. I was awake, but I didn't open my eyes. I was too scared of what I'd see beneath my bed. I clutched my stuffed animals and put all my energy into keeping my eyelids still. After what seemed like hours, but was more likely less than a minute, it stopped. Altogether, just stopped. My heart raced in my chest. I wanted to open my eyes to look around and see if anything was out of place or any evidence it had just been my sister pulling a late-night prank on me, but the fear was too strong. Somehow I managed to get some more sleep, but I slept terribly and was dragging the whole day. Sounds like me on Monday getting on that plane. I didn't tell anyone about what happened because I didn't really know what had happened. Throughout the day I calmed myself, and by nightfall was convinced that it wouldn't happen again, and that I would sleep soundly through the night. I was wrong. It happened again, and again, and again. Every night I would wake up without opening my eyes to my whole bed frame having an earthquake. This lasted for months before I told anyone. Relieved doesn't even begin to describe it when my best friend at the time believed my story. She thought it was cool since she never had any paranormal experiences of her own, and asked me if I wanted her to go beat the ghost up that was terrorizing me. That's a good friend right there, Meghan. That's a great friend. I laughed, and we both shrugged it off for the rest of the day. After I got home from school, I stared at my loft bed in the daylight. I needed to have my friend's attitude towards this thing. I needed to be brave and stand my ground. This was my room, my bed, and nothing was going to mess with that. As my bed shook again that night, any brave thoughts flew the coop, and I was arrested with fear once more. I mean, I wouldn't be too hard on yourself there, Meghan. That's how I always felt about fistfights. You know, when you're a young man, you think, oh, when the fist fight comes, I'm going to be ready. And then it happens, and you get punched in the face a couple times, and you think, oh no, this shit hurts.
Yes. Don't be so hard on yourself.
This wasn't like the other nights, though. Even with my eyes closed, I could sense I was in a weird position. My eyes flew open. My closet, that was right across from my bed, was upside down. How could that be? I asked myself as the bed rumbled. I gasped and clambered my way to the opposite edge of my bed. I had woken upside down, halfway down the stepladder. Whatever it was that had been shaking my bed all this time, I didn't see it. There was nothing out of place in my room, only my shaking bed that creaked against the quiet night. I tell you, man, if I woke up hanging half out of bed, I would not be half for long. I'm a top-heavy gentleman. I would have landed on my head like I'd been given a pile driver.
It's usually the sign of a good night, that.
Yeah, I guess. The next morning, after I woke up still shaken from the night before, I told my mother all about it over breakfast. She drank her coffee, contemplating my words, and letting me finish my months-long story. After I was finished, I picked at our green-tiled kitchen table, afraid she would think I was crazy despite her telling me her own ghost stories all the time. After a few moments, my mother looked me straight in the eye and said, "The next time it happens, tell it that if it means no harm, it will stop shaking your bed." And that was that. So simple yet harrowing. I knew she was right. Only one thought bobbed to the surface of my mind and poked at me for the rest of the day. What if it meant harm? What would I do then? That night my bed routinely began to reverberate. I said nothing and held my eyes shut tight. When morning came, I woke feeling guilty I hadn't stood my ground, only for my bed to begin shaking right before my eyes. This wasn't a dream. It was daylight, and my bed was shaking. I swallowed hard and looked down to the spot at the very end of the stepladder where I imagined the ghost was standing and shaking my bed frame every night. I cleared my throat and said, "If you mean me no harm, please stop shaking my bed. It's scaring me." To my relief and surprise, my bed stopped shaking immediately. After that, my loft bed never shook again. A few months later, my dad and sister went to New Hampshire to see a NASCAR race while my mother and I stayed back to paint her room. My sister had wanted purple walls for so long, and now that we were finally in a position to do so, we jumped at the opportunity. I slept in my parents' room that night, and my mom and I were having pizza and a movie night after an exhausting day of painting. My sister's mattress and a few other belongings were in the hall just outside while the paint dried. As we settled in to eat and watch a movie, my mom peeked outside her door, closing it with a snap. She smiled, asking me questions about the movie or the pizza to keep me distracted. It would take her months to tell me what she saw that night. I would be deeply suspicious if my mom was interested in my opinion on anything.
Yes, it sounds ominous.
Bren, how are you doing? Okay, something's wrong. What are you up to? What have you seen?
How's your day, sweetie?
Oh, then I'd know she'd been replaced by the Terminator. Your mom said she can't wait to see you. Something is wrong. That isn't. She has been abducted. God, I'm going to get such shit for that. My sister listens to the show. Sorry, Mom. Don't hit me. She will. She'll climb right up my leg and punch me in the face.
Hearing footsteps had become a regular occurrence. No one could really disprove that the footsteps we were hearing weren't each other's or our cat running around the place. But that night, my mother heard heavy footsteps thumping upstairs from the basement. She said they sounded like big boots dragging themselves up each step. Her first thought was not an assailant of the paranormal kind. She was alone with me, and was obviously afraid that someone had broken in through the basement and was making their way upstairs. Rightfully so, she was terrified and peeked her head outside of the bedroom door, listening intently into the night. The footsteps stopped for a few relieving seconds, then continued up the main staircase that led to the bedroom upstairs. She closed the door louder than she wanted to, turned up the movie, and pressed her ear to the door. The footsteps grew louder and louder until they reached the landing. She was immobile, frozen in terror. Said a voice. My mother managed to open the door quietly and peek out into the night. She watched as an elderly man inspected my sister's mattress that leaned against the wall. After eyeing the mattress for a few seconds, he walked into my sister's room and disappeared. After that, we learned to live with the little things. Footsteps coming up the stairs at night, sounds of our cutlery drawer being rummaged in, our cat running up 2 flights of stairs from the basement and hiding under our parents' bed for hours. And that feeling you get when someone is in the room with you, when you can sense the energy of another person present with you, yet nothing is there. This was also a regular occurrence. From time to time I would be sitting in the living room or dining room and hear my name whispered clear as day next to my ear. I did my best to ignore that. I didn't want to let whoever know that I could hear them. But what really cemented everything for us was that on every trash night, phantom sounds of a trash bin trailing up and down the sidewalk to the curb and back again repeated. We laughed and thought it was funny that a ghost was trying to take our trash out, until those ghostly bins started to bang on the side of the house. My room overlooked the main sidewalk, and I had a clear view of who was coming and going from our house. Whenever the banging started and I had the courage to look outside, there was never anyone there. No one ever tripped the light motion sensors that lined the perimeter, and none of the neighbours ever reported hearing any banging or trash bins being rolled up and down the sidewalk. It would be a while until we learned who the source of all the commotion was, and possibly why they were doing it.
So in my headcanon, it's Oscar the Grouch in a ninja costume? None of us saw the answer coming. Legitimately, number 5 will shock you. It was Oscar the Grouch.
One day our neighbour, let's call her Beth, commented to my mother that we weren't upkeeping our lawn very well, at least to her standards. Oof, neighbours like that.
Oh, right? This whole thing drove me bonkers.
It's a shame what happened to your windows, Beth. I can't believe your garage caught fire, Beth. Man, that's crazy, isn't it?
It's a nutty old world we live in.
The chances of that.
Happening 3 nights in a row. And then someone spelled out, go fuck yourself and gasoline on your lawn? That's dark.
Ah, and the firecrackers through the letterbox must have been the final straw for you there.
And they were in bull's eyes? I don't know what that was all about. That was gross.
Where did they get that corpse from?
When you're Paul Bestel, you know a guy.
You better believe it, baby. Beth was the typical nosy neighbour that loved to think she was the only homeowner on the block that cared about anything, the only member of her self-appointed neighbourhood watch. One Saturday morning when I was trying to sleep in, I woke up to see Beth mowing our lawn. Yes, literally taking upon it herself to mow someone else's lawn. She locked eyes with me suddenly, waved, and I slid back behind my blankets. Now that you know that's the kind of person we had to deal with, let's move on. As Beth came over to talk to my mum outside and undoubtedly shade our shrubbery, my mother asked her about the previous owner of the house. Beth spoke about him with a fondness, and the first thing out of her mouth was, "He kept a beautiful lawn." I wish I was joking. Beth also said that he had trouble remembering when trash night was, so he often took the trash bins up and down the sidewalk multiple times during the week. This made my mum nearly choke on her coffee, but that wasn't the eerie part. Beth showed my mum a picture of the previous owner, and it was the exact image of the elderly man she had seen a year prior in the hallway inspecting my sister's mattress. The story my mother came up with in order to make sense of it all was that the previous owner was just coming to check up on things with the new tenants. Perhaps he was mad that the lawn had fallen under his standards, and so he'd started banging the trash bins against the house to get our attention. As it was the only explanation we had, the only way we could even begin to make sense of things, we kind of believed it. After a while, the sound of the trash bins and the banging stopped. Then the conflicts that started happening amongst the living took centre stage. My parents separated in the summertime. It's funny how some moments in time are frozen in amber, a sign that things will never be the same. I was playing dolls in my room when I heard weeping next door. I poked my head out and saw that my sister's door was open just a crack, but it was open enough to see my mother crying. Muffled voices and the sound of movement shoved me back into my playing spot, and I pretended that I'd heard or saw nothing. My mum came into my room and told me to start packing a bag. We were going on a vacation.
And, you know, in all seriousness, I saw this thing the other day, and it was a meme, so it's not exactly deep, but I think it was actually kind of a neat way to look at this stuff, you know. It's going to be okay, it's just going to be different. And I think that's a really, really nice way to look at this kind of stuff. Like, what Meghan said there really just, I don't know, it really resonated with me, this idea that some moments are frozen in time like amber, you know, and you just know these are dividing points between that life and this life.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't have many of them, you know, I mean, maybe there are a couple, but I don't think I realized it at the time. I think the only one I can think of offhand where I know I saw it, I felt it in the moment was when my grandfather was dying. Because I remember it was after he'd gone into the coma because he had cancer, and they told him, you know, we can give you a treatment, but there's a very good chance that the treatment itself is going to harm you, you know, just because he was quite elderly, and you know the cancer was pretty advanced. But he was a go-getter right up to the end, man. He said, no, let's try it. And it did. It put him in a coma. But I remember as I was standing next to his bed, I had this thought, and I've never stopped thinking about it. You know, I always go back to it. And it was this voice that said, oh, right, it's this part. It was like some part of me had experienced it before or knew it was coming. I don't know. But I distinctly remember having that thought, oh, right, it's this part. And again, that was, you know, I don't know if that was a moment I would say it was a demarcation point, but it was near to one at the very least.
Yeah. I think most of us have got moments like that in our lives, very similar to how Meghan describes it.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm sure. See, most of mine are revolving around things like that, you know, where like when I came home and, you know, found out that X person had passed, or, you know, got a phone call to say that Y person was gone. It's usually those things, but I guess those are often the moments that cut the deepest. You know, I don't necessarily have a ton of those around joy, except for my bed picnic with those donuts. As a 10-year-old, all I was concerned with was packing enough of my toys to take. My mom helped me pack my clothes, but it wasn't a fun packing experience like we normally had on vacation. My dad wasn't home, and she wasn't packing his bags like she normally did. My mom was continually crying and sniffling as she folded my clothes neatly into my Barbie suitcase. She told me to pack as many toys as I could, since it could be a while before I could bring the rest to Grandpa's house. That's what got me. My mom crying, my dad at work, a sudden vacation I hadn't heard anything about until that day. I knew what was happening, but as the proclaimed comedian of the family, I felt that I wasn't allowed to be upset. Oh, Meghan, that resonates, believe you me. I had to prop everyone up, tell everyone that things would be all right. I had to show my mother that she didn't need to worry about me or how I felt about it all. I pretended not to know anything as we piled our suitcases and bags into our Ford minivan and drove away. 1926 Crossbow Court was the same as it always was, as I took my last look of it. And folks, don't do that to your kids. Don't make them responsible for your emotional well-being. Meghan, I'm not saying that's what your mother did, but some people do that to their kids, and just don't do that. Let kids have their fucking emotions. They're your children. They're not your therapists. Again, Meghan, I'm not saying your mom did this, but this is just an aside for those folks out there. We were on the road to Grandpa's house in Lewes, Delaware. And Paul, this kind of blew my mind, and I'll tell you why in a sec. My father's father owned a beautiful seaside Victorian home minutes away from the beach. Usually around Easter, we would take a vacation and go see our grandpa. His wife, Pat, our grandmother by marriage, no one really liked. She always told my mom she needed to get a job and put me into ballet school, which was something I never wanted to do. But Grandpa was an interesting and lively character. He co-owned the bed and breakfast that he and Pat had converted their home into. He loved my sister and I so much. That much remains clear to this day. He also believed his house was haunted and would regularly tell the guests that, in his room, someone had hung themselves decades ago, and he could still see them hanging from the rope sometimes. After hearing that story, a woman staying in the boarding house packed her bags and fled. Grandpa never stopped getting a kick out of that. I like him already, Meghan. Kind of sounds like my grandpa, if I'm honest. It's amazing how much I don't remember of that time, the day-to-day happenings. But the experiences we had there would forever stick out to us and become the topics of late-night debates about what it all meant. The pink-paneled house had 8 rooms, each room painted a different color so the guests would know their rooms by their color. Whenever my family came to stay on vacations, and even when my mom left my dad, mine and my sister's room was always the pink room. Painted pink with matching bed sets, 1 twin bed and 1 day bed laid on the perimeter of the L-shaped room. Everything in the house was old, including the white metal bed frames you'd find in a World War I movie. My sister and I always had unofficially assigned beds, her taking the twin and myself sleeping in the day bed facing the door. I loved the oldness of the house and often imagined myself running through the cherrywood halls playing pretend in a fantasy world or in another era. The house at night shifted. Shallow light filtered through the rooms, leaving plenty of space for dark corners and staircases swallowed in shadows. Random creaks were the norm. The adults claimed it was the house settling. The more this excuse was used, the more I was convinced that it wasn't the case. My grandpa encouraged the ghost stories, however, and I even felt comfortable enough to tell him that I saw ghosts. He nodded his head, and then said something along the lines of, "Sounds about right." When my mom was looking for work in the first summer days we had been uprooted, my sister and I played in what we called the big house. If there were guests, we knew better than to be running around the place. But it was a slow start to the tourist season with more beachside motels opening for business, so we did what kids like to do best when left off the proverbial leash. We went exploring. After playing hide-and-seek for a bit, my sister went upstairs to read. I enjoyed walking around and feeling out the place. Each room had a different energy to it, some milder than others. The green room was always my parents' room when we came to stay, decorated with white seashells and plants, really leaning into the earthy vibe. The blue room was dedicated to the ocean, always calming and serene. At the end of the hall was the white room, my grandfather's bedroom. The attic, the only place you get to by going through a secret door in the upstairs bathroom, I kid you not, yet another bathroom secret door, Paul. This was rented by Bill, a longtime friend of my grandfather's. When Grandpa had fallen down the stairs one night, I'd run to get Bill and saw his room for the first time. It was decorated like a hunting lodge with a small television on the dresser. He liked beer and was an all-around cool guy that got invited to family dinners. The energy upstairs was usually clear and light. And just before we move on to the next section, Paul, this kind of blew my mind because I have a credit card that is sort of I don't know what you'd call it. We have this issue, and I'm sure you guys do too, where there are things you can only get in the U.S., but they only accept credit cards with U.S. addresses. You, for whatever reason, like if for Hulu, for example, or if you want to rent a movie on Amazon or buy certain things, you have to have a credit card with a U.S. address. You cannot use one with a Canadian address. So there are companies that will offer you this service. You have to pay a little extra for it, but you get a credit card and it's prepaid, so you have to load it and then you can spend it and you can buy shit. So I have one. I haven't used it in a long time now, but it gives you an address so that you can put into these things. And the address of mine is Lewes, Delaware.
Lewes, Delaware. A lovely gift from the King of England for a man he owed money to.
Really?
Yes.
Tell me, how does that work?
Because obviously we were in charge of everything.
Yes.
And we'd stolen it off the Dutch, obviously.
Sure.
Who'd originally settled there. And so we stole it off them, and the king gave it to somebody he owed some money to. And he changed the name to Lewis after the town in England, and renamed the county Sussex County, because Lewes is in Sussex here in England.
Sounds very English.
Yes, and I think everybody should follow that example.
I was talking to Joseph on the most recent episode of Weird Together, and he said something which I loved. He said, England's greatest contribution to the culture is how many Independence Days it has spawned around the world.
Yeah, they're all jealous, aren't they, though?
Yeah, that's 100%. That makes sense.
And they have Independence Days to remind them of what they miss.
That's it, of the good old days.
Yeah, that's exactly how we view them all here.
I think now you guys view everything outside the borders with deep suspicion. I think that is what I take away from the British news. They're coming to take our jobs, the British say, as though you had any jobs to take.
As I've said for probably the last 6 or 7 years, I'm a lottery win away from emigrating to Portugal.
Where would you go?
Portugal.
Oh, you would go to Portugal, eh?
Yeah, it's the same time zone.
Ah, okay.
It's lovely weather. And if I pay £500,000, I become a Portuguese citizen.
Sounds like a good deal to me.
So if I win the Euro lottery, I'm off. I'd live in Ireland, but it rains too much.
I mean, I would not enjoy the constant Damocletian sword of being an English person living in Ireland.
Yeah, but I'm not really a typical English.
That's fair.
I kind of think Ireland's had a point for a very long time. Anna told us to fuck off as well.
That's fair. That's fair. You wouldn't be like when I took Nick to Belfast. That was a mistake.
No. Always reminds me of that brilliant Jimmy Carr sketch where he said, what I'd like to say, I think he was in Dublin when he said it, what I'd like to see is a united Ireland under English rule. Cheeky Jimmy.
I was going to say Jerry Adams appears out of the nearest potted plant.
But yes, Lewes is one of numerous places that we thought, that looks nice, we'll have that.
Well, I found an article in a newspaper from Lewes that I thought I'd share before we move on to the rest of Meghan's story here. The article goes, while restoring the Cannonball House in the 1960s, which is the Cannonball House is a historic home in Lewes, Delaware, the Lewes Historical Society's maintenance man would neatly arrange his tools each night, only to find them scattered the next day with the door to the attic ajar. After coming in time and time again to the same scene, Fred Hudson nailed the latch to the door shut. If a squirrel or other animal was causing the issue, surely this would stop it. The next morning, the nail had popped out, and the tools were scattered. In the same room in 1917, a woman's dress had caught on fire, killing her, according to Executive Director Mike DiPaolo. Hudson attributed the events to her ghost. According to Mike DiPaolo, this latch would be opened each night as the Cannonball House was restored in the 1960s. It wasn't the only time someone was spooked in the building. A few years ago, DiPaolo said a former Delaware River captain came to visit the house, now a museum. I still don't know exactly what he saw, but he was up there one day and he came back here and said, I just have to get out of the house. There's just something there, DiPaolo said. And this is a big old guy that has seen a lot of things on the river. Whether you believe in the paranormal or not, ghost stories have historic value, DiPaolo said. If it exists, it exists. If it doesn't, it's still a part of our history. It could be considered folklore, he said. These are stories, customs that have been passed down as part of this town's cultural oral tradition. That's just as much a valid part of Lewes history as something that's written down on a piece of paper from 1813.
Absolutely.
And the article goes on. I'll post a link to it in the show notes if I remember, so you guys can read the rest of it. But it just talks a little bit more about the hauntings of Cannonball House in Lewes, Delaware. So we're going to take another quick ad break, and we'll be back with more of Meghan's story. All right, welcome back, and time for more of Meghan's story.
Downstairs was another story. The room Pat stayed in didn't have a name and was right at the foot of the staircase. No one was allowed inside, and of course, hearing that as a child, I knew I had to look in at least once. So when she was out shopping and everyone else had scattered, I crept inside. Her orange cat that was cantankerous all the time was sleeping on her bed. And the room was different than the rest of the house. It wasn't clear and light, nor was it negative. It was just heavy. The atmosphere was decorated with a combination of feelings, as if the room itself was confused about its place. Movement sounded from the living room, and I darted out of there, never going back in. The one place you could never get me to go down was the hallway that led to the kitchen and the door to the backyard. Pat loved travelling and hated children. Despite this, she was a teacher for eons and a strong agnostic.
That has just tickled you.
Brilliant. Pat loved travelling and hated children. Despite this, she was a teacher for eons and a strong agnostic. Outstanding. She did not believe in a before or after for us, and cemented this one day at the kitchen table when she told me that people were made by a gust of wind that brought sticks and leaves together to create humans. I truly did not know what the heck she was talking about, and I just nodded, as children often do to remain polite to their elders. Anyways, she always brought back artifacts from her travels, specifically art, and her favourite place that she'd ever visited was Africa.
I gotta say, Paul, I just saw Sasquatch sunset the other day, and I'm pretty sure I know where kids come from, and it's not the wind.
Yes, I think Pat might have had something in her coffee when she was coming up with that sort of creation story.
I don't know if that's something a strong agnostic necessarily believes in. I think Pat may have incorrectly identified her belief system.
Yes, I think Pat sort of preaches at the table of Dr. Frankenstein.
I'm a pantheist who believes that the universe was created when a giant's brain was smashed open. Nope. No, you're not.
Yes, tell me more about this over one of those special cigarettes you have.
Why do they call it jazz cabbage? You'll see.
I'm not sure where specifically in Africa she went, just that she said the people were wonderful and she'd won big at an auction house, bringing back dozens of statues and figures. Even as I'm writing this, just remembering that hallway is giving me a heaviness at the centre of my stomach. The energy in that hallway was insane. When I'd approached the mouth of the hallway, I often felt that there was an invisible rope, a barrier of some sort that would not allow me to cross. And when I crossed one day out of curiosity, it was as if I was walking through gelatin that had a concrete heaviness around it, and all the while I was being watched. I ran through the hallway into the kitchen. I couldn't get away fast enough. From then on out, I took the long way to the kitchen through the billiards room. To be fair, that sounds a better way anyway, I think. My sister did the same, and it would be years later that I learned she felt the same energy in the hallway and steered clear from it just as I did. I mean, to be fair, if I had a choice of walking down a hallway or through a billiards room, I would always take the billiards room, and I'd always end up knocking the balls about for 2 minutes. One morning at breakfast, my mother scolded me and my sister for running around at night when we were boarders in the house. We were perplexed, looking at each other for confirmation that we had behaved the previous night. My sister and I had both fallen asleep reading, neither having gone downstairs, and we would know if one of us had gone for a midnight snack. The doors were so heavy they refused to close quietly, and always made a snapping sound as the latch fell into place. As we pleaded our case to our mother, after a bit she nodded and said she believed us. She shook her head, telling us that she'd heard footsteps in the upstairs hallway before, often heeled boots clacking about. But this time it was different. It had sounded like little feet in the hallway and on the grand staircase, scuffling about downstairs and in the kitchen, and that's why she thought of us immediately.
I remember I talked to someone, they stayed at an Airbnb somewhere in Nova Scotia, and they had the same experience, but they were guests there. They heard what sounded like kids running around the floor, and then they went out to go look and see what the hell was going on. As I remember, they heard the sound, but they didn't see anything. But when it approached them, they actually felt something pass through them. And they felt afterwards they were just exhausted.
How strange. As the school seasons approached again, my grandmother by marriage thought it best that we moved into McNichol Place, the other property they owned that sat neatly in the trailer park about 20 minutes away. I thought we were getting kicked out, but my grandfather's first wife and my dad's mum, Kay, was moving into the big house out of a hospice to receive care. She wanted to be at home near the end. So off we went to McNichol Place. The trailer park wasn't the trashy image some may at first picture. This was a nice neighbourhood that preferred the term mobile homes. Mostly everyone was friendly, mind the few characters that clearly wanted to be left alone. There were 3 bedrooms, and always me and my sister took the 2 rooms on the right side of the house that were right across from each other. The bigger bedroom on the left side of the house my mother took. This house used to be the house my dad's mum lived in for decades before she went into the hospice. Now at the big house we had moved into what was once her space, and a home my family had visited over the years. We knew the house well because of our visits. Or we thought we did. The experiences were mild at first. Footsteps and rustled leaves around the perimeter of the house were explained away, as it just being some people passing through the forest that was right behind our home. That was equally scary to me. Those woods were dark. It never made sense to me that people would just be casually walking through the darkness without any light to guide them. Lights I would have surely seen if they were passing through.
Right in the back of the house, encased by floor-to-ceiling glass windows, was the patio. It was weirdly constructed and made no sense to me as a child why the outside patio with no curtains overlooked the dense forest on all sides. It was creepy, especially with all of Kay's leftover things collecting dust there. I dug there a few times, but in the summer it was unbearably stifling. It was as if that room collected all of the humidity in the house and held it inside. The heat wasn't the only reason I would run out of there. There was always a presence there, even in the years when we were only visitors. I always felt something. Something watching. Something hiding. I wasn't sure. All I knew was that it was there. One day I was bored and digging through the boxes piled up at uneven heights. Sports paraphernalia and old knickknacks were mainly what I found. But as I dug, something on the other side of the room dug too. There were some odd ruffling noises. I looked in that general direction right across the room from me. My sister would never go out there, so I knew for a fact it wasn't her. And my mom was making lunch in the kitchen. Somehow I knew exactly where this invisible digger was. It was as if I was looking right at it. I was frozen in terror, and at the same time I had stopped digging, it had stopped too. I ran for the door that was thankfully only a few steps away, but I didn't want it following me back into the house. I shut the glass door tight behind me and ran to the kitchen. My mom was making a recent favorite of mine, tuna sandwiches with toasted bread and Swiss cheese. That's a great choice. And I told her what had just happened. She nodded, and I knew. She'd seen something there too. Over lunch, my mom told me an experience she'd had while doing laundry, which was right next to the door of the glass patio. She went to get something, and when she walked past the window, she jumped at the face staring back at her. It was gone in an instant, but coupled with my experience, she told me and my sister the patio was off limits. Curtains went up shortly after that. One night while I was getting ready for bed, I wanted to grab a cup to brush my teeth. It was on a high shelf in a cabinet, so I stood on my tippy toes. All of our glassware was in that cabinet, and as soon as I wrapped my hand around the cup, the cabinet collapsed. Wine glasses, beer steins, glasses, cups, you name it, were in that cabinet. All I could do was watch in horror as soon-to-be shards of glass, all but guaranteed to cut me up, began to fall. But in the same instant, it had to be in the same second that the cabinet started collapsing, the back of my nightgown yanked hard against my chest, and I was pulled, the back of my heels dragging across the linoleum floor, and fast. I stood in shock of everything. The cabinet collapsing, the broken glassware littering the floor right where I was standing a mere second before, someone grabbing my nightdress and saving me from being seriously injured. My mother and sister came running into the kitchen from the living room. And then I knew. Neither of them had been the ones to pull me out. I looked down at my bare legs that had only 2 minor scratches on it from the glass that fell. Rather than explain that the cabinet collapsed, I screamed, "Something pulled me back!" I pointed to the glass in awe, thanking my guardian angel. As we went through more family drama and trying to get adjusted to new schools and a new routine, the house changed. I remember the holidays being happy, if a bit awkward, with my dad visiting, and no one really talking about what needed to be talked about. After that, it seemed to darken, all at once. My cat liked to roam about the house at night, forever our little tiger protector. The spot she would always be guarding was the middle of the house. Smack dab in the middle was a huge brass round table we used to keep the mail on, and anything else we didn't have a set space for. She loved to sleep under the table, and sometimes I'd catch her curled up with her eyes wide open, watching the dining room and kitchen directly across. Whenever I'd get up in the night to use the bathroom and go to the kitchen for some water, I would look over to that spot with the table. It always seemed too still, or darker, than the rest of the room. I hated crossing that space at night, much like Pat's hallway with statues. I always hurried and ran into my mother's room, shutting the door quickly behind me. One night, I dreamt about that particular spot in the house. I dreamt that I was walking across it, but something was behind me and all around me at once, and I rushed to get away from it. I woke up with a start, terrified. Months later, something happened where my sister and I had switched rooms. I don't remember why, but the first night I slept in her room was the last night I would ever sleep in there again. As I closed my eyes to sleep, something in the room started moving. I clamored and reached up to turn the lamp on, thinking it would squash any scariness. I was wrong. Whatever it wasn't nice. The energy felt dark and kept zooming around the room, taunting me, playing with me. It wouldn't stop. It kept going like that for what seemed like forever, until I gathered enough courage to jump out of the bed and fly out of that room, seeking solace with my sister across the hall. When I looked back, the room was quiet. I had been so scared that my pants were soiled. Neither myself nor my sister slept in that room ever again. And that is genuinely chilling stuff, Meghan. Holy shit. All right, so we're going to take one last ad break, and then we'll be back with the conclusion to part 1 of Meghan's story.
On March the 17th, St. Patrick's Day, I laid in bed wide awake watching the dark. My mother knocked on my door, and before she could say anything, somehow, I knew. My grandmother Kay had passed away. It was a blur, and we were all sad. After my dad came back up from Virginia to plan the funeral, everyone was busy with coordinating the details and hovering over me and my sister. When I did manage to get some alone time to process, I wondered how long it would take her to visit me. I half expected her to see her at the funeral, and when she didn't show up, I was certain she'd pop up at my school or on the road as I walked home from the bus stop. Days, weeks, and months went by without a sighting or a dream. My mother said that Kay came to her in a dream and said her goodbyes, and I was a bit envious that she didn't appear to me in any way. For I know there was a reason for it. Years later, I dreamt of Kay knocking on our front door at the townhouse in a beautiful black velour 1950s dress, adorned with a diamond brooch. She was young again in her prime. I was so shocked that I slammed the door in her face and immediately felt bad. She walked through the closed door and said hello. Now that's how a ghost makes an entrance. All in all, I grew up that year we lived in Lewes. I had stopped playing with dolls, finished reading Harry Potter, and had read my way through the first 3 Twilight books. I was learning how to do my makeup and figuring out who I was and what I wanted to be. And after 1 year, we returned to 1926 Crossbow Court. It was strange going back there after so much family drama had happened. The generational trauma that had weaved its way through mine and my sister's upbringing had bound us to ideals and ideas that were only beginning to break. On the outside, the house looked unchanged. On the inside, it was another story. We found out that my dad had been staying in a motel the whole year we were in Delaware. He would come up to visit, and somewhere along the line had convinced my mother to return to Virginia. In that whole year, no one was in the townhouse. Dust clung to every crevice of every unchanged appendage and decoration. We opened all the windows to air the place out as I went upstairs to my room. I surveyed my girlhood, my Barbie castle against the wall, frozen in the day that we left. My loft bed had sunk a bit, and the sunlight-stained posters on my wall lost most of their colour. My earring collection from Claire's had tumbled to the floor when I brushed past my wicker bookcase. This room didn't fit me anymore. I was a completely different person, grown up and matured by the whirlwind of the past year. After we spent the last of our summer cleaning and rearranging the house, it was back to school and back to our routine. We thought things would get back to normal with time. But time was why things would never be normal again. Time had been alone in that house for 1 year, and something else had moved in.
All right. That is the conclusion to part 1 of Meghan's story. We will have part 2 on episode 188 coming in 2 weeks' time. Thank you to Meghan for sending in her story. We'll thank you again in the C segment because we're thorough like that.
I do like a chilling yet amusing story, written very well, Meghan.
And that is very true. This is a very, very well-written story. I did very little to this. I trimmed a little bit. Maybe I cut out about 1,000 words. But, that's it. This was very, very well-written. It's a brilliant story. And again, I'm very excited to share the thrilling second half with you. So we hope you have enjoyed this slightly unusual episode of Ghost Story Guys. This format that actually harkens back, I think, to sort of version 1.0 of the show, which is kind of interesting. But it's been a lot of fun, my friend.
Pleasure.
Thank you as always. I guess I'll see you in the C segment here in about 8 seconds.
Okay, see you on the other side.
We'll be right back. Hey there, listeners. Before you reach for that skip 15 seconds ahead button, I promise you this isn't an ad. We wanted to take a minute to talk to you about mental health. On this show, I've always tried to be as honest and open as possible about my struggles with depression and anxiety, because even though we've come a long way towards acknowledging the very real damage these things can do, there is still way too much lingering stigma about reaching out for help. And when you start to feel like there's no help, it's easy to start feeling like there's no hope. But Paul has joined me today to remind you there is always hope and there's always help.
We're not going to try and talk you out of self-harming right now, because we know that's not how it works. Instead, what we wanted to do was tell you something now and hope that should things get bad, you'll remember it and make a phone call or send a text message before you make any permanent decisions. As someone who knows all too well just how important mental health can be, it's never too late to reach out.
In Canada, the number to call is 133-456-4566. In the USA, the new number to call is 988. That's 988.
In the UK, the number to call is 116123 or text SHOUT, that's SHOUT, to 85258. In Australia, the number to call is 131114.
However bad shit seems, it will pass. And no matter what your brain might be telling you at any given moment, and believe me when I say I know this intimately, there are people who love you and people who care deeply about how you treat yourself. Should a time come when you find yourself despairing, please know that we've both been where you are, and there is a way back to the world. Take care. Welcome back. Don't forget to tune in next episode, that's 188, for the conclusion to Meghan's story. And of course, as we said before the break, if you've got a story to share, ghoststoryguys@gmail.com is the place to share it. We would love to hear your stories. All right, the Ghost Story Guys are Luke Greensmith, who helps us find our stories. He is also host of the Luke Lore podcast, available on podcast platforms everywhere. Tanya Downing, who helps with our editing, manages our Facebook community, and is co-host of the Streaming into Madness podcast with Walter Whitaker. Sarah Kent, who manages our Reddit community. Joseph Camo, who manages our YouTube account. Adam Lynch, who edits our video. He's also host of the Weekly Creep podcast with Dulce.
Our paranormal conductor is Mr. Brennan Storr.
And my co-host, of course, is the one, the only, the inimitable Paul Bestel, the paranormal Johnny Carson himself, host of Mysteries and Monsters. Paul, what's coming up on M&M?
I've got some interesting episodes coming up. This week, I'm joined by the Reverend Alison Dunlop Shanes, talking about her new book, Mystic Visions, which is a very interesting journey through spiritualism and a variety of intriguing encounters that she's experienced. Before I welcome back a long overdue return to the show, to a Mr. Lyle Blackburn as we dive into the Bishopville lizard monster case.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, it's been a while since Lyle's been on.
He's a busy man.
Yeah, I believe it. He just put out a new episode of Monstro Bizarro, I saw.
Probably my favourite other show that I don't do. It's amazing.
It's a great show.
I love Lyle's Monstro Bizarro. It's a phenomenal podcast.
Is that the topic of his new episode?
No, he's done The Beast of Bladenborough.
That's it, yes.
Very famous.
So he releases that monthly, right? Or sort of as and when, I guess.
Yeah, as he can. So he's only on episode 13, but I think he's done about 15 episodes because he's done a couple of two-parters. He did a Skunk Ape double episode and a double episode about Boggy Creek. He's a phenomenal researcher, and obviously as a musician, he's got a real ear for a musical soundtrack and sound effects that go along with it. So he's... if you've never listened to Monstro Bizarro, I recommend it highly because it is a phenomenal piece of work.
I could not agree more. And where can everyone find you online?
You can find Mysteries and Monsters across all social media platforms and podcast sites.
Fabulous. I'm Largely the Truth on Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and Letterboxd. You can also find my other show, Weird Together, which examines the sociology behind the latest and greatest in independent horror films. I co-host that with Joseph Camo, who is host of the Sociology Professor YouTube channel. Again, you'll find Weird Together on podcast platforms everywhere. Paul, do you have any guest spots coming up?
Not currently. No, not that I'm aware of.
Fair enough. Last night I recorded a spot on Where Did the Road Go with Soraya Azkath. That was a really great conversation. We were on the phone for 4.5 hours, which I think is a record for conversations not had with you. You and I have still beat that record, but for conversations with other people, 4.5 hours is, that's a new record. And I'm going to be going back to do a part 2 in early May. So look forward to that. I'll post that up when it comes out. And we did a bonus chat for his patrons as well. So there's a lot of content from old Bren here over at Where Did the Road Go? And now, as we said at the top of the show, patrons and Apple Podcast subscribers get lots of cool stuff. You get bonus shows like the conversations with me and Paul, which are typically recorded before almost every major episode, anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour and a half long. You get episodes of Host Adventures, which is your bi-weekly trip through my brain, where I kind of talk about what's going on with me and my life in a format I stole directly from Kev at We Need to Talk About Ghosts. And of course, there's lots of other cool stuff. There's our monthly live show. I just recorded an article for patrons, which is an article about the evolution of ghosts and folklore at Hong Kong University. That was about 15 minutes, I think. And again, all kinds of other cool stuff. There are probably, I would say at this point, close to 100 hours of bonus content in the vault. And again, you can find all of that at patreon.com/ghoststoryguys or by signing up to Ghost Story Guys Premium via Apple Podcasts. And of course, if you support the show at the $20 level and above, well, my friends, that makes you part of an elite club. A special club. A little club we like to call Ghost Force. That's right. Patrons who support the show at the $20 level and above get thanked here every second episode in Ghost Force. This time around, the members of Ghost Force are
Atham Ceragon,
Big Titty Kitty,
Brad wears a pink tutu,
Cackling Skull,
Cheryl Baker,
Crazy Mom,
C.T.,
Blowy Two Hats,
Generic Bob,
Hannah Brown,
Hannah Siemens,
Hilary Dissasur,
Jade Moores,
Jenny Bonanani,
Always makes me laugh, that one.
Jason R. Slaughter,
Slaughter, Jennifer Mullen,
Joseph Como,
Kimberly Hansen,
Malevolent Clamato,
Mara Noriega,
Mark Semler,
Megan Rocket,
Merlin Hansen,
Nicola,
Peter Gunn 08.5,
Rebecca Brink,
Robin Tien,
Ruck and Ronnie Shenanigans,
Samantha Rellis,
Shannon Steyer,
Stefan Schwartzwald,
and Trent Kenner. You are the few. You are the spooky. You are Ghost Force. For real, guys, thank you so much. Again, we value all our patrons and Apple Podcast subscribers, but folks who are able to support at the Ghost Force level, you are truly a rare breed. You're crazy, and we love you for it. And if you want to have your name read out in this segment every second episode, head to patreon.com/ghoststoryguys. All right. If you want to pick up some Ghost Story Guys merch, head to our website at ghoststoryguys.com. We have all kinds of good stuff, t-shirts, stickers. I'll be putting up a few more things here over the next couple weeks. And if you do buy something, make sure to tag us on social media when you do, and we will repost it. We love seeing you guys wearing our gear. Shout out to our composer, Rainy Days for Ghosts. Rainy Days for Ghosts is a project of the film journalist and musician Harper Smith. Find more of Harper's work by heading to rainydaysforghosts.bandcamp.com or by searching for Rainy Days for Ghosts or Street Witch on streaming platforms everywhere. Our theme song, Radio, Into the Darkness We Go, is composed and performed by Peter Kursov of Pizzanta Music. Find more from him by searching for Pizzanta Music everywhere you get your tunes. And I guess that's going to do it.
We'll be back next week, but until then...
Into the darkness we go. Nope, that sounds like a sex thing.
There was a car driving past, so I muted myself. No, I completely forgot how anything worked anymore. Sorry.
We've all been there. I hate that the older I get, the more I become aware of how sensitive I am to noises and loud noises.
Yes. Shit music has that effect on me.
Well, again, you survived the head injury, so I think that fits, if anyone.
Yeah. If somebody shoots me with a crossbow through my leg over the weekend, then I know I've definitely made it.
And I will be, look at my face, 0% surprised.